Apostate. Julian was a very popular fellow in the church, as you can tell. That's why he got the nickname. Not the Hammer. That'll become later. This is the Apostate. So you can already tell that he's probably not going to be the most popular guy that we're going to talk about. Julian was, but he's actually probably one of the better leaders that Rome actually had, especially in this time. So let's talk a little bit about what over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about Donatists, and Arianism, right? And what are some of the things that you guys remember about that? What are some of the things that stood out about those things?
Well, it was a constant, it was a good, a give and go back and forth. It was involving heresy.
Yep, there was heresy. There was actual doctrine involved.
Yeah, and the doctrine of Christ.
The doctrine of Christ.
The deity of Christ.
And we got the Nicene Creed, which is really is critical in our doctrinal understanding and the progressive revelation. Progressive understanding, I guess, might be better. What else?
Church and state interaction.
Church and state interaction, right? Now the church actually matters to the state, and the state actually matters to the church, right? So let me ask you this question, because this matters a lot. The church, is it just doctrine? What persecution have we seen so far that has just been about somebody's doctrine, or somebody's beliefs, or somebody's just, we don't like the way you look at that situation, so therefore we're persecuting you?
Yeah, it doesn't really seem like about the purity of the word or anything. He just seems like
Yeah.
The word is intact. Yeah.
So as we look at all these events, how things unfold, the persecutions, the leadership, everything else, what have we noticed about God's story, God's church, God's people? It's all about the people.
Yeah.
Everything that's happened has happened because of what somebody did, what somebody thought, good and bad, right? All the persecutions, they're not about the fact that I don't like your beliefs on such and such a doctrine. It's, I want my position of power, so therefore I'm going to get rid of you. I want this to happen in Rome, so let's go persecute the Christians. I don't want to take the flak for the fire in Rome, so I'm going to blame the Christians. Right? Persecution is not just about what you believe or don't believe. Persecution has people involved. All of our doctrine has people involved. The church itself revolves around people and personalities and who did what and how they thought and what people think. That tells you a lot about God's church. It's not about the doctrine per se, as it is about the people. The history of everything is revolving around people. What they do, what they think, how they act, how they react. Okay? And so nothing says that more than Julian, the Apostate. Okay? The way he reacts, if you're a Christian, is not necessarily positive. Okay? But it also will make sense as we go through it. Okay? So Christianity, what are we seeing with Christianity? Constantine comes up, he wins a few wars, figures Christianity, some kind of magic talisman, decides to put it on all the shields, decides to start giving state property to the church, starts favoring it, starts not necessarily declaring it the official religion, but at least encouraging people to participate in it. It's no longer illegal, things like that. And then what else do we start seeing about Christianity? Is it still the same 3-year catechumen process?
No, it changes constantly.
Are they still trying to find places to meet in catacombs? Are they still just trying to sneak into house churches, always wary of who's looking at them and who might be tracking them? What's happening now?
The state's involved now.
Okay, but what does that mean?
Power.
What does that mean? What does it look like?
Good to be a Christian.
It's good to be a Christian?
Yeah.
So what does it look like? What are they seeing? What are these people seeing? You're going to find Julian was actually one of the smartest men we're going to talk about. Very keen, very observant, very smart, very disciplined. And he hated Christianity. Why? Hypocrisy. Because what was he seeing in the church now? For years, what was Christ's message? Live how? We should really get a wireless.
About your salvation with fear and trembling.
Yeah. What was your focus? Christ, the world to come, heavenly places, glorified treasure in heaven. That was what he knew the message was, right? And during that time where constant persecution was always over them, that kind of message was actually, I don't want to say easy, but it made a lot more sense, right? It was easier to see when you were always in fear of this world. There was nothing in this world to really enjoy because you were constantly in fear of persecution, because you couldn't meet freely, because everything you did was under suspicion. But now, all of a sudden, your priests are coming with ornate robes, right? And there's processionals, and at the head of the processional is the emperor. And he starts setting up hierarchies, and he's dictating doctrine, and we're getting rid of heresy. And isn't this great for the church? Sort of. It's nice. The Nicene Council may or may not have happened without Constantine's involvement, right? And from the Nicene Council, we get one of the best creeds that the church has come up with. Nothing wrong with that. But what's happening is the church is starting getting diluted, and they're starting to focus more on what's happening here instead of what's happening in heaven. And that's leading to hypocrisy, or at least perceived hypocrisy. Okay? More and more people are coming into the church that don't believe. More and more priests are coming into the church which you're not really sure if they believe. And the way they're acting is more pagan than Christian. Right? So when you think about these things, don't just put them in Arianism or doctrinal terms or whatever else. Think about what the people were seeing at that time. What did they see as they looked around? What were they perceiving? How were they reacting? Because no reaction happens in a vacuum. And very few reactions happen because of doctrine. Almost all reactions happen because of personality. What does this mean to me? How does this affect me? How does this affect my goals, my ambitions, what I want to see happen, right? And the way that works out, if you have good motives, those kind of things can happen well. If you have bad motives, things aren't going to turn out so well, not from our perspective. Okay? We're going to talk about Athanasius next week. He'll redeem Julian. Okay, so that's a review. Ken says that was for free. Constantine's successor. So he dies. Because no one lives forever. Right, men? Let's get it. Anyone? All right, so he's still an emperor. So how do you determine your successor if you're a king or an emperor?
Usually a relative, a son.
Yep, some kind of relation. And so if you have a bunch of relations, who can claim the throne?
And the one who survives killing each other.
More or less, yeah. Anyone can. So to make sure that you don't have too much competition, you kill everyone else, right? Well, that's exactly what happens. So Constantine dies. He has a bunch of family. They all get killed, leaving just 3 of his sons and 2 of his cousins. I think they're his cousins. So there's Constantine II, there's Constans, and there's Constantius II. So here we are back in that whole thing where everybody has to use the same stinking name over and over again. Yeah, that's where we are again. So Constantius was Constantine's father. Constans just looks like a weird abbreviation. And then Constantine II, of course, makes sense. So what they do, because they can't decide who's going to rule, is let's divide up the kingdom into an eastern region, a western region, and a central region. Is this sounding oddly familiar? And how did it turn out last time?
Yeah.
That whole thing where you're doomed to repeat it? Yeah. Yep, here we go again. Now, here's the thing. Let's go back to what we learned at the end of last lesson. Arianism. Calls the Nicene Council. They roundly get rid of Arianism. They say it's wrong. Remember the whole thing that we read with even the extra edited parts? If anyone believes or says this, or says this, or says this, or says this, they're anathema. And then Constantine said, all right, that's true. So any Arians, you're exiled. Now what happened at the end? What happened at the very end? He reneged.
Started inviting them back in.
He invited them back in. One person in particular.
Athanasius?
No, he was good.
Who?
He was a good guy.
The other Eusebius.
Eusebius of
Caesarea.
Nicomedia. Caesarea was our historian. Batting 1,000. You're batting 1,000 so far, Judy. Eusebius of Nicomedia. He was the guy at the Nicene Council that spoke on behalf of Arianism, right? And he was invited. And what did we find out about Eusebius of Nicomedia? Where did he live?
He lived really close.
Easy.
Next door.
Nicomedia. That was the easy question, okay? He lived in Nicomedia. And what else was in Nicomedia?
Nicomedians.
The question is witches. And what do we do with witches? Right? What was in Nicomedia? Well, Constantine's palace was in Nicomedia. And so when Constantine went to church, who was the bishop at his church? Eusebius of Nicomedia. And so when Constantine's looking for religious advice, who does he go to? And when Constantine wants to teach his children Christian doctrine, who does he go to? So what did these children grow up in? Arianism. Okay? Now, if you listen to Arianism, one of the big things about Arianism, it sounds a lot like paganism. Keep that in mind as we go through Julian and his thought process. Now, the Christian faith now has turned into a political football. So if I'm Constantius II, I'm the firstborn, and I grew up Arian, and I take this half of the empire, and then my other relatives have this half of the empire, what do they believe? Whatever's not Arian, right? If he believes Arianism, I'm going to take the other option. Why? Because I'm such a strong believer that I believe the Nicene Creed and I believe in the deity of Christ? Or the other possibility is, that's a lot more depressing. I just pick the other option.
Yeah.
Just so I can be against that guy. Okay? So the Nicenes tend to be, the guys that favored Nicenes were in the West. The guys that favored Arianism were in the East. Not because they actually had conviction, but because they didn't like each other. Eventually, one of them drops out. Now there's just two of them. Constans was killed, quelling a rebellion, and then Constantius becomes ruler over the whole thing. Now, he's the guy that was pro-Arian. So what happens to the empire? The empire becomes pro-Arian. What happens to the Nicenes? What happened to the Arians the first time? What happens to the Nicenes? They get exiled. Right? It all comes full swing. So now the Nicenes are going to get exiled. And now the Arians take over because Constantine II takes over. A lot of names, I know, just stay with me. Meanwhile, the nephews, Julian and Gallus, are just sitting in seclusion. Constantius II, though, is very superstitious. He's jealous. He's scared. He needs someone out west. Because remember, what did Constantine do to the political capital? Where did he move it?
To the east.
Right. So the first time we had the empire divided into threes, where was the capital? Rome. Right in the middle. Now this time we do it, where's the capital? Way out east. So now Constantine II is way over here. How do I rule way over here? So he's got to find somebody to trust. Well, he'd prefer to have family, which really proves to be absolutely no benefit whatsoever. So he originally chooses Gallus. Gallus is very given to, Gallus is a jock. He's very given to physical prowess, so he probably looked the part. You put him out there, the guy was a disaster, okay? And so he recalled him, and eventually he beheaded him because he was conspiring against the emperor. He wasn't very good. All right, so then that leads us to Julian. Julian was the younger of the cousins. He was the only one left of Constantine's line after the massacres and the wars and everything else. Now, this guy was interesting. He grew up with a Christian education. He went to church. He was actually serving in the church. He grew up under Eusebius of Nicomedia, just like Constantius II. He would go with Eusebius. Now, one thing to remember about Eusebius, he had really bad doctrine, but that guy his life was actually quite remarkable. He was very impeccable in his character. He was serving the poor. He was doing everything he could, everything he should, quote unquote, should, as a Christian. He was humble. He was serving. He was in charity. He was serving the church. He was doing everything that he knew. His doctrine was way off, but his character was good. And Julian patterned his life after what he saw with this guy Eusebius of Nicomedia. So he would serve the poor. He would go to church. He would take communion. He would do all these things. Okay? But while he was there, he was also really smart, and he would read a lot. And when he would read a lot, he would ask questions a lot. And who would answer his questions? Well, Eusebius. Okay? So what happens when Eusebius dies? Who answers his questions? What do we say about the church now? It's diluting. Who's coming in? Lots of people. Who are the bishops? The most godly? Not anymore. So who's answering Julian's questions? No one. And Julian's starting to get frustrated. And so he starts turning and he starts looking at ancient Roman philosophy, because that's also what he's reading. And since no one can answer his Christian questions about the Bible, guess what he starts finding answers in? Greek philosophy. And why does that work? Because Greek philosophy is highly allegorical. So if you want to make up your own religion, what are you going to look at? You can make it into whatever you want it to be. Works for me. I can answer my own questions that way. Because these Christians say there's only one way to actually read the Bible. But I can read Greek philosophy any way I want to. There's no right answer. Okay? So at the age of 20, he begins to drift away from the church. He gets frustrated by the endless controversies between the Eastern and Western churches regarding doctrines like Arianism. The debate between the two. There's other councils that happen during this time, not just the Council of Nicaea. There's lots of arguing. It's not all gracious. It doesn't necessarily have an answer. The bishopric we already talked about is becoming corrupt. So he started to really dislike Christianity. In fact, he started to hate Christianity, because then he started associating Christianity with the massacre of his family, because that was all done at the hands, what we think, of Constantius II, who said he was Christian. Okay, so he starts equating the massacre of his family with Christianity, and so he just starts hating Christianity. The hypocrisy, the loss of his family, everything else. It's not going well. Anyways, he eventually comes across, gets the title Apostate, so we'll talk about that. So he takes, so we mentioned before, Julian is now there, he's the only guy left. Constantius II is looking for some kind of help out west, so he appoints Gallus. Gallus is a moron, so he dies, and then I bring in Julius, and Julius goes out there, and then he surrounds Julian with his own advisors. Constantius does not trust Julian, okay? But he has no one else that he can turn to. So he turns to Julian, says, Julian, go live out west. So he takes up residence in a place called Paris. And he lives there, and that's where he rules the regions of Gaul. Gaul and Britannia and Iberia. Hopefully those things sound familiar. Thinking that he's not that great, Julian ends up being a great leader. He's actually a really good administrator. He leads a number of battles against the barbarians in the West. He establishes colonies in France, Spain, Great Britain. He does all these things and really gets the loyalty of the army, okay, as their commander, so far, as their commander. As the fame rose, so did the suspicions of Constantius. He really started hating Julian. Julian's doing too well. And if Julian does too well, then what's going to happen? People are going to start liking him more. And if they start liking him more, they might want him to be emperor. Oh, okay, time to get rid of him. He's reached the end of his sell-by date, right? So Constantius, he's fighting the Persians in the east. So just kind of take note in your head. What's happening on the western portion of the empire versus the eastern portion of the empire? In the eastern portion, I have the capital, I have the seat of power, I have the Persians. In the west, I have an increasingly isolated people going against random tribes of barbarians, and they have zero connection with the capital. Right? So what happens now is Constantius says, I got to go against the Persians. Julian, you've got a great army over there. Give me your best troops. Have them come and help us fight the Persians. What's wrong with that picture?
Weakens his defenses.
Weakens Julian. Certainly that was one of the purposes. What's one of the problems? If you're sitting here in Trier or Paris, and you're supposed to go fight the Persians, what's the first problem? Here's France.
Probably loyal to your
Here's Turkey.
leader, right? So you don't want to leave them.
No.
No?
3,000 miles.
3,000 miles that you have to march. And what's up here in France? I guess, hold on, I have to do the Rick thing. Okay, so for you, that'd be here. Turkey's here, right? The reverse projection. So I'm here. What's up here in France?
Home.
Home. Your family. Your life. Everything is up here in Paris. What's over here? A lot of stuff I don't really care about. I don't know this area. I don't know the Persians. They mean nothing to me. This guy Constantius, he means nothing to me. Only Julian means something to me and my families. And if I take all my best troops and I march 3,000 miles, how long is that going to take? Months. There was no trains. There was no cars. There was no planes. You marched. And when you marched 3,000 miles, you were gone for months. And then it was more months back after the war. And what's up here during that years of being out? My families, my cities, everything I know, everything I value, everything that's important to me. And as soon as the barbarians realize that all the troops are gone 3,000 miles away, what are they going to do? They're going to come attack. And who's left there to attack? My kids, my family. So what is the motivation for me to want to march 3,000 miles? There is none. What else do you notice about the people in the West versus the people in the East? I speak Latin, they speak Greek. We traditionally are more Nicene, they're more Arian. Our families are over here fighting the barbarians, your families are over there fighting the Persians. Here's a seat of power, there's a seat of power. You see the slow drift between these two? The Roman Empire is going to kill itself. Okay? So, Julian's in a tough spot. The army doesn't like it. If he says you got to march anyways, he's going to alienate his troops. If he says no, that's rebelling against the emperor. Now he's back and forth. So he finally decides he's going to submit. They start moving. The troops start moving from Paris through Paris. They have a party. They all get drunk. They come up with a plan. They kidnap Julian and they proclaim him emperor. And Julian is just utterly surprised and completely flabbergasted that his army would do this. Of course not. He knew exactly what was going to happen. So he allows them to do this. Now, so then he writes to Constantius and says, hey man, we're not going to be there because I'm the new emperor. Just FYI. My first act, how about if we divide the kingdom in two? I'll take this side, you take that side, and we'll all live happily. Now Constantius says, that's not cool. And Constantius says, all right, I'm going to go march. Okay, after we're done with the Persians, dude, you are so in trouble. You are so in trouble. So that allows Julian time. So Julian starts establishing his rule. He does not say no to the emperorship, and he starts building up his army. Because Constantius can't do anything about it. He's got to defeat the Persians first. Because where is Constantinople? Well, really close to the border. He can't afford to take troops away from that side of things, right? And meanwhile, Julian continues to rise and gain power. Julian? Oh yeah, sorry, your direction. Use your imaginations. Eventually, he negotiates peace with Persians. He takes his troops, starts marching against Julian. Julian starts coming against him. Constantius has the better troops. He has more, he has better war machine. Julian's coming thousands of miles. Constantine's not coming as far. So you think this is really going to work out well, and then guess what? Constantine gets a fever and dies the next day. Okay, so now I've got Julian coming in. The army's with him. I've got Constantius over here and an army with him. What does the army not want? I don't want another civil war. All right, Julian, you're emperor. It makes sense. Your royal bloodlines, you've already got half the army with you. We're going to let you be emperor. So this guy takes over and becomes emperor in December of 361. What does he become like? The guy is given wholeheartedly to the administration of the empire. He starts, now he's very well read in both Christian works and the works of Greek philosophy. So he actually starts taking time, he starts pulling nuggets out of both to create what we would call as public policy. So he starts extolling virtues like servant leadership. He believes in humble leaders that are served to the good of the people and to the nation, right? So he was often just and reasonable. He would believe that he should separate himself from the lusts and the powers of previous rulers. So he would live an austere life. I don't know if you remember what that means. That means he would live very poor. He would not get grandiose things. He didn't have big palaces. He didn't wear fancy robes. He lived an austere life. Survive. He didn't wear the clothing of an emperor. He would wake up early. He would listen to the petitions of the people and render judgment. And they were often very fair and considerate judgments on real issues. He wrote letters to his various generals around the empire, instructing and encouraging them, right? He would go to the Senate and he would participate in the debates. And instead of going to the front of the Senate, he would actually sit with the regular legislators and just be one of them, participating in the debates. So he was...
Was he in Rome or Constantinople?
Constantinople. Yeah, he moved.
Over there.
He would also, he dismantled the entire, the court. He came in and found that the servants of the people had servants. So they were servants of servants. And he said, this is just wrong. And they're all getting paid by the state. So he immediately comes in and says, we don't need your services anymore. You're fired. All within like a week, which wasn't the smartest thing in the world. But he just kills it off and just totally cuts out a ton of fat from the budget. So this is the kind of guy he was. He was actually really cool. I actually wouldn't mind this guy particularly as our president. He was smart. He was very smart. He was very able. And he poured himself into this role. In this regard, Julian was a great guy. He was incredibly gifted. And he used those gifts for the role that God had given him. Unfortunately, Julian used the same kind of passion and dedication to his religious practices, which is really weird. As smart as he was, and as reasonable and fair as he was, when it came to religion, it just totally flips. Now he's all of a sudden superstitious. So he was very into Greek philosophy. And now he starts to denounce the Christian faith. Christian church calls him the apostate, but he views himself as the true hero, the one whom the gods have appointed to bring them back and to set Rome up. Okay? He would read Greek philosophy. And remember what we said, even though Greek philosophy has a point, it can be anything you want it to be because it's just a man-made system. So he made his own system. Here's what it's going to be about. Here's how it's going to work. And he comes up with his own set of rules, theology, philosophy. So he decides he's got the true religion, and he seeks to restore the glory of Greece. The myths, many of you have heard the myths about Greek and Roman gods, many of which are very similar across Hinduism and so on. They're not necessarily clean, like some of them are kind of rated R. He would just look past that and he would say it's an allegory. Here's the true meaning of those stories. So even though he believes in a humble, above reproach life for himself and his priests, as we'll see, he looks at the gods and says, oh my gosh, look at the way they act. Well, he didn't really mean that. So he says, this is how you should live. Here's how his gods lived. He didn't have a problem with that. Why? Because this is what he wanted. That's the problem with men. Remember we talked about everything revolves around personalities. I just had a talk with a guy from Russia, and then we're working with a group of offshore developers from Ukraine, and talking about these guys and the way they see the world. Man, they are very into what is Putin like. What is Putin like? Well, Putin likes this, so this becomes the official policy of the country. We think we're bad. Putin's Okay, anyways, that's different. Putin's the leader of Russia. So Julian's theological system stemmed from his reading of Plato. Okay, here's his thinking patterns. He believed that there was a single eternal cause of the universe. Okay, he described all the attributes and perfections of the infinite nature. The eternal cause is invisible and beyond the understanding of mere mortals. This could have been, what does that sound like?
Like the atheists today or something, or what do you call it, universalism? Like that.
Sounds a lot like God.
Yeah.
When you say an eternal cause who's both infinite, who's beyond our understanding. Do you think he may have got that from somewhere? This guy was Christian. Remember, he grew up in a Christian house. He was the guy that was a traditional Southern Baptist, who grew up in a Southern Baptist home, went to all the revivals and everything else. He knew the Bible. He went to Vacation Bible School. He went to Sunday school. He learned all this stuff. He had some of the best teachers of the time. He knew his doctrine. Okay? And so he takes Plato, and now he's got Christianity, and he says, well, look, they both agree. There's an eternal cause. And that eternal cause caused everything. And where did that eternal cause from? I don't know. It's eternal. It's always been around. It's the uncaused cause. He totally believed in that. That worked, right? All living things can attribute their existence to the eternal cause, right? Very Gnostic in that regard, but also somewhat Christian. Now, the eternal cause created, or maybe generated, the first generation of immortal gods. Now we're off the rails as far as Christianity goes. Sort of. We're off the rails according to whose doctrine? If you're a Christian. The Nicene doctrine. Because we said that Nicene doctrine says that Christ was pre-existent. Same stuff, always existent, right? But if you're an Arian, does this statement cause you problems? Because what was the heart of the Arian doctrine? There was a time that he was not. That Jesus was what?
Created.
He was created. He was the... This is it. Because this unlocks a lot of current cults as well. What was Christ's name? He was the firstborn. Right? And what do the Mormons believe? He was the firstborn. Who created everything? What does Colossians say? Nothing came into being without him. Right? Is that a problem?
Yeah.
No. He was the firstborn. And then he created everything. Do we violate Colossians? Nope. Works just fine, doesn't it? He was the firstborn. The eternal cause created Christ. Christ created everything else. See, it all holds together. Now you have other problems, but that's not the point. Okay, and that's where the Nicenes had to fight against the Arians. No, that's not the way it works. But Arians said, yeah, he was the firstborn. See, that's exactly what the scripture says. He was made first.
So it wasn't about the substance, that Greek word, whatever it is. Substance.
Homoousis.
Yeah, it wasn't about that, and they weren't at that level.
Well, that was the issue, right? Because if he was created, he couldn't have been really of the same substance. He wasn't the same.
All right, so that was the term that they were against.
The Arians were.
The Arians were.
Because they wanted similar substance. And Constantine insisted on same substance. Right? Just keep that iota. It's going to drive a lot of public policy here in about 600 years. Okay? All right. So, he's the eternal cause. The eternal cause created something, and that creates everything else. Now, where did he get that? He got that from Arianism. And agrees with Plato. So this is all working towards Julian's thinking. Okay? So, his immortal generation, he has responsibility of forming and governing the earth with its harmony of man and nature. However, their government is imperfect, and so they're kind of prone to humanistic tendencies of favor. They'd have favoritism, wrath. So, given the gods' tendencies to vanity and anger, it is in our best interests, given our imprisonment to their world system, to seek the favor of these gods. Okay? This is all Near Eastern religion. This is where the Bible came from. So as you're listening to all this, this is exactly where the Bible grew up in. This kind of system goes back thousands and I mean, it's from the beginning of man, right? This is where it all came from. And as God raises up his Bible and he raises up his people, these things that we're talking about are the background to your Bible. And if you understand these kind of things, as Rick's been teaching us on Thursday nights, it helps you understand your Bible so much better to understand what were they looking around at. Because everything in history is about people's actions and reactions, their personalities, how they think of the world. And so as God tells people, as we learned in Isaiah, a lot of what God would tell, or have Isaiah tell the people, was based on where they were at that time, what they were seeing, what they were thinking, what they were used to, and how God's not what they were seeing, and God's not what they were used to. So, really cool stuff. All right. So the God's tendency is it's our best interest to favor these gods. So we have to satisfy them with worship and sacrifices. And these gods would, from time to time, even condescend to take up residence on earth. Interesting. And they would walk around and they'd enjoy all the statues and temples. What did Jesus do? Where'd he go? The temple. See, it all kind of works together, right? I can explain a lot of Christianity in my own little world system. The sun, the moon, and the stars, however, were a little bit different. What's different about these guys? What's different about the sun, moon, and stars? What do we like about them? Okay. Not as much in the stars.
Something you can see.
Okay. How often do you get to see them?
Constantly.
Every day. Where does the sun come up? In the east. Where does it set? In the west. The moon. Can I tell you its phases? Yeah, it happens on a regular cycle, right? What about the stars? North Star? They're always in the same place. Oh my gosh, how perfect is this system? This system is perfect. And who is the only source of perfection? The eternal cause. So the sun, the moon, and the stars must be different. They're showing the eternal cause to me. And who is the god of the sun? Jupiter. So who do I go and worship? Jupiter. See, it's just all coming together. It all makes sense. So he started realizing that the sun, the moon, and the stars, with their uniformity, were creations not of the inferior gods, but of the true eternal cause. So he started worshiping the sun because it represents the, what's that famous word that we keep coming back to? It's in John? The Logos. It's the Logos. So Julian believed that the ultimate cause is rational and separate, and therefore the key to human life, which is very Gnostic, was to separate your souls from the banality and the passions of the flesh. That's a quote. I should have put quotation marks because there's no way I would ever use the word banality. From the banality and passions of the flesh, by which this is how we free our souls and reunite with the infinite spirit. So he's a Gnostic. According to a contemporary that wrote about Julian, Julian also lived in an ongoing conversation with the gods. He described it as they apparently often descended upon earth that they might enjoy the company of their favorite hero. They woke him while he slept and warned him of impending danger. He knew them so well that he could distinguish the voice of Jupiter from Minerva, which is very complicated. It's not easy. Yeah. Yeah, I think he might have been schizophrenic. So anyways, the guy was an incredible leader, but he had issues. Okay, now to Julian, remember we said what matters is people's reactions. So here's his doctrine. Here's how it all works out. To Julian, Christianity was the reason Rome was no longer in the blessings of the gods. Christ is just another created God, right? But the Christians would say there are no other gods, and that was insulting to these other ones. That's why Rome's enemies were making inroads. That's why they needed to bring these gods back to get strength back. Have you heard this story before? It should sound fairly familiar. He hated the Christians. He wrote letters against them. He called them Galileans. He actually wrote a whole work that still survives called Polemics Against the Galileans. That was a derisive term for Christians. Because remember, they considered most of Israel backwater. Like it was kind of the redneck area of the empire. They couldn't stand it. The Romans hated Israel and anywhere around that area. So to be associated with it was really insulting. He used his understandings of the scripture and a significant education in Christian principles to write against Christianity. He would tear them apart in his arguments because he knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing, and he knew exactly what he was seeing. And then he would just make fun of their doctrine because it didn't fit his world system. Okay? They weren't sure if he was going to bring back persecution. Remember when the Christians got all the land and everything else, what did they do? Reach out in evangelistic ministry to the pagans? Immediately come over and say, hey, you know what, nothing's changed, let's talk about the gospel. No. They took the land from the pagans. They destroyed their temples. They went over and they did everything to them that they had done to them. Do unto others as you would have... No, wait, no, that didn't make any sense. Do unto others as they've picked on us, we're going to pick on you. And that's what they did. So now Julian's in power, and what do the pagans want to do? They want to go back and they want to get their revenge. It's the cycle. But Julian is also keen on history. And what did he observe about persecution? Martyrs actually help the cause. They don't hurt the cause. So his goal is not to make martyrs. Now, did that happen? A little bit, but not much. So his goal was not to outlaw Christians, but to show how Christianity was a useless religion. Okay? So in 362, he issues an edict that prescribed a freedom of religion across the empire. Okay? No religion would be favored by the government. Everything is equal. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Why would he do that? That sounds great. That's our Constitution. Not really, but okay. Why would he do that? Why does this work to his advantage? No, he didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. Remember, everything's a reaction.
He thought the Christians would show their true colors.
Partly. Yep, keep going. But why does that happen?
He thought it would be bad.
Why would that happen? He prescribed tolerance for all worldviews. Meaning what? Who's allowed to practice? Everyone. Including whom? Christians and pagans and...
The pagans are going to win out or something? They're going to overtake the Christians? Do you think other religions will
Arians and Nicenes, so they can fight with each other.
Let's bring back the Arians and the Nicenes, because those guys are like oil and water. So what am I going to do if I bring back every version of Christianity that's existed and say you're all equal? Yeah. Then I start having a council to talk about whether that guy's right, and now I start getting splintered and fractures and everything else. And if you ever watch The Life of Brian, that's the funniest part about it, is you got the people's front of Judea and the Judean people's front, and you got these people and those people, and there was all these groups. They were making fun of the Essenes and the Pharisees and everything else at the time. They just splintered. And he was hoping that by bringing all these Christian sects back in, that he might be able to fracture Christianity so that they're always arguing about who's right. And they're so split that there is no majority, there's no right or wrong, because everything's just all over the map. That was his goal. His goal is not freedom of religion. His goal is confusion of religion. Okay? He reversed many of the privileges enjoyed by Christians. He ordered the restoration of temple properties to their rightful owners. Well, that seems fair. What was the problem there? That's a good question. Who was the original owner? So what is he doing?
Christian churches.
If churches were built on the site of pagan temples, and it has to go back to the original owners, what happens to that Christian church? Destroyed, so they can build back the temple. So now he's destroying churches. By saying he's destroying churches? Nope. By passing fair, just laws that I hope that we all agree with, because this is the Constitution, people. Freedom of religion. It can go both ways, right? We talked about that you allowed Donatists and Arians back in. Now, the rule is you're not allowed, is tolerance. You're not allowed to say anything about anything. You can't say anything's wrong. So what are Christians, what did he hope Christians would do as they came into public education?
kind of obliterated like they are now.
Like we thought of as
Why don't you guys go ahead and pull your children out of the schools? Because you don't like this paganism anyways. Just go be by yourself. And then that way, what did he want to do? If they're going to go isolate themselves, what do they become?
An anathema.
Not influential.
No, he's not. He's subtle. Julian's very, very smart. Like Rick smart. Like kind of scary smart. That's how smart, okay? What is he doing?
Well, he's getting the influence, the Christian influence out of
Good.
the public school system.
So if they isolate themselves, then what happens to Christianity? They become marginalized.
Yes.
They also lack the educational
They don't have any education because they can only go so far as a family unit.
Class, too.
So they lose their relevance because they're no longer studying the current stuff. They lose their legitimacy because they're not amongst the people. And they can't go very far in their education because they're not in the schools. And as much as homeschooling can do a lot,
Yeah.
there's only so far you can go, right? So that was his plan. Please, Christians, pull your kids out. Be marginalized. Go live in Montana somewhere. Be happy all by yourself while the rest of the world continues to spin. That's exactly what he wanted Christians to do. Okay? I'm not even going to go anywhere with our current society with that. So don't think I'm telling you anything about current society and its plans and homeschooling or anything else. I'm just telling you what Julian's doctrine was. That's what he wanted the Christians to do. Okay? He wanted them to become illiterate. He wanted them to become marginalized. He wants them to become associated with poor, illiterate peasants. And now the pagans was what? We're not redeemed. So do they care about the poor? Not particularly. If you were poor, it's because the gods didn't like you. Remember Job? His friends, they kept a nice professional distance from Job, accusing him of all kinds of problems, right? His wife, ugh. Called it false compassion. Dang them, Christians. They're so nice. So he started establishing hospitals across the Roman Empire that would serve anyone and anyone. That was his answer, and also encouraging the pagan priests to start to look more like Christians. How did he do that? He led processionals. There'd be great pagan festivals and sacrifices. He started setting up a hierarchy of priests that looked a lot like the church hierarchy. He started setting out expectations for the priests. And I'm not going to go through all this. There's a great paragraph in here that tells you, but he expected them to excel in decency and virtue. He should never be seen in theaters or taverns. He should only keep his conversation chaste, his diet temperate, his friends of honorable reputation. If he visits the forum and the palace, it should only be as an advocate of those who have vainly solicited either justice or mercy. His studies should be suited to the sanctity of his profession. Sanctity of his profession. In other words, don't get paid to be a priest. Licentious tales or comedies or satires must be banished from his library. Right? What does he want a pagan priest to act like? A Christian. Be pure. Be chaste. Be honorable. Be compassionate. Don't do things from ambition. Be humble. This is what he's telling his priests he wants them to act like. But I don't want you to become a Christian. I just want you to act like a Christian. Right?
So to do good works, would you say?
Absolutely. He hated Christianity, but he knew too much to realize that Christianity was wrong. But he really wanted it to be wrong. That was his problem. So what happens when the political tides change? If you're in the empire and you realize your emperor is no longer Christian, he likes paganism, what are you faced with as a person? As a person, you're faced with what? A decision. What was the decision? As a Christian, that's different. You're faced with a decision. Do I stay as a Christian, Or do I go with the new political winds, which is paganism? Do I go offer those sacrifices to the temple and Jupiter? Do I sit here and listen to the bishop here in this church? Which one should I do? That's your decision. And guess what was happening? What would a majority of the people do?
They probably succumb.
Sure. They were only in the church because the emperor said it was good. Now the emperor says that's good. Okay. Right? We're lemmings. We follow. In the army, that was a big deal. The cross was removed, replaced by pagan symbols. What was really hard was before receiving wages, each soldier had to sprinkle a few grains of incense in honor of the emperor. That was fine when it was saluting the emperor. Now it's worshiping the emperor as if he was a god, because remember, he was the true hero of the gods. You know what's really weird, though, is Julian decided he wanted to rebuild the Jewish temple. He tried this. Why would he do that?
He's tolerant.
He's tolerant, but why did he actually put money and effort into rebuilding the Jewish temple? Remember, the state's supposed to be favoring no religion. Okay, let's go build a Jewish temple. Almost. It's actually not that, because he hated the Jews too. Everybody hated the Jews. You're going to find a very consistent theme across most of history. Everybody hates the Jews. It's really weird, and there's something about it that's almost biblical in the way it's been played out. I think God has bigger plans for the Jews. But that's actually not the right answer, although it would sound like it.
The core belief of Christianity was that after AD 70, God was, at least temporarily, he was through with Jews. And
Well, drop the temporarily part.
well, yeah, that he was permanently at that point, that it was Christianity now that God is working
Right.
through the world.
So as of AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, that convinced the chiefly Gentile church that God was done with the Jews and was primarily working through the Gentile Christian church. So why did Julian want to rebuild the temple?
It's against Christianity.
Because it shows that the Christians were wrong. So he had a vested interest to make sure the Jewish temple was rebuilt.
Of course, the Christians were ignoring Paul's warning about pride and arrogance.
Don't worry about Romans 11.
Yeah. I get that one. Yeah.
Don't worry about all the things that God's going to do in all the Old Testament, the philosophy of prophecy that doesn't appear to have been fulfilled. Just don't worry about that part. Okay? So he tried. But this is what we find out about it from a contemporary historian of the time. Whilst Alypius, I have no idea who that is, assisted by the governor of the province, urged with vigor and diligence the execution of the work, horrible balls of fire breaking out near the foundations, with frequent and reiterated attacks, rendered the place from time to time inaccessible to the scorched and blasted workmen, and the victorious element, continuing in this manner, obstinately and resolutely bent, as it were, to drive them a distance, the undertaking was abandoned. So whatever happened as he tried to do this was totally destroyed, like almost supernaturally destroyed, as he tried to rebuild the temple. There was balls of fire and weird stuff happening that just kept, every time they tried, they'd get cut off and they couldn't do it. Weird stuff. Okay, that was an interesting story. Let's see. Christians were not officially persecuted, but there were some persecutions that broke out as pagans got even with their Christians. So what does a Christian world do? Are they humbled? Do they react? Of course they react. Everybody reacts. How do they react? Sweetly, humbly, kindly, obeying the emperor. Just like American Christians do. What happens when American Christians have their toes stepped on? Come on.
They go to the courts,
Good.
try to get justice.
Try to get justice.
From the world, not from God, but from the world.
So they start to riot, and they start to rebel, and they start insulting the emperor, and they go the other extreme. Okay? So Christians are not above reproach here. Julian goes after it this way, Christians respond this way. This whole thing is becoming a mess. Now, Julian, he does, as smart as he was, he does something stupid. Where was Julian from? Originally? Now, where did he end up? Where is he from? Remember we talked about? France, which is in the west. Those people loved him. He came out east, he looks like a usurper, right? Because he came out of nowhere, and now he's sitting in the east. So he decides to gain power in the east by, how do you do this? Nope. War. It's either marriage or war. You have two choices. So, so in this case, it happens to be war. Hey, let's go fight against the Persians. And if I can soundly defeat the Persians, even though I have a peace treaty with them right now, if I soundly defeat the Persians, the eastern armies will favor me, and now I'll have my power base solidified. So he decides to come up with a campaign to take over the Persian capital of Ctesiphon. I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. It's C-T-E-S. It's weird. Okay? Ctesiphon. So he leads his army. Now, he's a very smart guy. So he splits up his army, and they start going, he wants to flank Ctesiphon from both sides. So he takes one side, and he starts going through, I forget how he went. He went one way, across the Tigris. The other one was going to kind of circle around and meet him. Okay? He ends up getting there first. In the process, he great. The problem is, he starts to isolate himself. As he goes into Persia, the Persian troops start coming in after him, and they start burning all the fields. And then, because he's afraid that he doesn't want the Persian troops reusing his pontoons across the Tigris, he burns all the pontoons. So now he has no means of retreat. He has no means of getting supplies. He thought he would just pick the food that he's taking over, but the peasants start abandoning their cities and burning their fields. So now he has no supplies. So he tries for a while, he loses, they start to retreat. Okay? And as they're retreating, they're going through a hilly region. The Persians are just continually picking at him as he goes, right? As they're going back, they start to get attacked from behind. He's got 30,000 troops, so this isn't like a little camp, Cub Scout camp, right? He's got 30,000 troops. So it's really hot. He takes off his armor, jumps on his horse, runs back to help fight against the Persians. Well, the Persians are not dumb either. While they're attacking here, they send another group up to the front of the retreat, and they start attacking from the front. So he starts getting on his horse to go up to the front to try to help those guys out. Well, at the meantime, to split the two companies. He's on the ground. They take him back. That actually inspires the Roman army to finish off the Persians. They finish their retreat. He can't stop the bleeding, and he ends up dying that night. He ruled for 1 year and 8 months.
Wow, he did all that in 1 year.
Everything that we just talked about was done in less than 2 years. Like I said, this guy was impressive. He was very impressive.
I bet he thought he was immortal, though.
Well, yeah, totally. Yeah, can you imagine what this kind of work rate and these kind of gifts could have done as a believer? But that's not what happened. It wasn't in God's plan. So God's plan was to have this guy show the Christians just a little bit of what this world's still about.